find it all out," replied Oswald, who then left Edward, and returned to the landlord and recommenced conversation. Oswald, on his return, told Benjamin in what manner the sword had been procured from the shopman, by the grandson of old Armitage. "I never knew that he had one," replied Benjamin, "nor did I know that old Jacob was dead." "What became of all the women who were at Arnwood?" inquired Oswald. "Why, Agatha married one of the troopers, and went away to London." "And the others?" "Why, cook went home to her friends, who live about 10 miles from here, and I have never heard of her since." "But there were 3 of them," said Oswald. "Oh yes, there was Phoebe," replied Benjamin, looking rather confused. "She married a trooper, the jilt, and went off to London when Agatha did. If I'd have thought that she would have done so, I would not have earned her away from Arnwood behind me, on a pillion, as I did. She might have been burned with the poor children, for all as I cared." "Was not the old lady killed?" "Yes, that is to say, she killed herself, rather than not kill Southwold." "Where was she buried?" "In the churchyard at St. Faith's, by the mayor and the corporation, for there was not money enough found upon her person to pay the expenses of her burial." "And so you are a tapster at the Commonwealth. Is it a good inn?" "Can't say much for it. I shan't stay longer than I can help, I can tell you." "Well, but you must have an easy place, if you can stay away as long as you do now." "Won't I be mobbed when I go back? But that's always the case, make haste or not, so it's all one. However, I do think I must be a-going now, so good-bye, Mr. Forester, and tell Jacob Armitage's grandson that I shall be glad to see him, for old Jacob's sake, and it's hard, but I'll find him something to drink when he calls." "I will. I shall see him to-morrow," replied Oswald, getting into the cart. "So good-bye, Benjamin," much to the satisfaction of Oswald, who thought that he would never go. They went away at a rapid pace to make up for lost time, and soon disappeared around the corner of the street. Oswald then got out again, summoned Edward, and having called for the flour and other heavy articles, they set off on their return. During the drive, Oswald made known to Edward the information which he had gained from Benjamin, and at a late hour they arrived safely at the cottage. They stayed up but a short time, as they were tired, and Oswald had resolved upon setting off before daylight on the following morning, which he did without disturbing anyone, for Humphrey was up and dressed as soon as Oswald was, and gave him something to eat as he went along. All the others remained fast asleep. Humphrey walked about a mile with Oswald, and was returning to the farm when he thought, as he had not examined his pitfall for many days, that he might as well look at it before he went back. He therefore struck out in the direction in which it lay, and arrived there just as the day began to dawn. It was the end of March, and the weather was mild for the season. Humphrey arrived at the pit, and it was sufficiently light for him to perceive that the covering had been broken in, and therefore, in all probability, something must have been trapped. He sat down and waited for daylight, but at times he thought he heard a heavy breathing, and once a low groan. This made him more anxious, and he again and again peered into the pit, but could not for a long while discover anything, until at last he thought that he could make out a human figure lying at the bottom. Humphrey called out, asking if there was any one there. A groan was the reply, and now Humphrey was horrified with the idea that somebody had fallen into the pit, and had perished, or was perishing for want of succour. Recollecting that the rough ladder which he had made to take the soil up out of the pit was against an oak tree close at hand, he ran for it, and put it down the pit, and then cautiously descended. On his arrival at the bottom, his fears were found to be verified, for he saw the body of a lad, half clothed, lying there. He turned it up as if it was lying with its face to the ground, and attempted to remove it, and to ascertain if there was life in it, which he was delighted to find was the case. The lad groaned several times, and opened his eyes. Humphrey was afraid that he was not strong enough to lift him on his shoulders and carry him up the ladder, but on making the attempt he found out, from exhaustion, the poor lad was light enough for him to carry him, which he did, and safely landed him by the side of the pit. Recollecting that the watering place of the herd of cattle was not far off, Humphrey then hastened to it, and filled his hat half full of water. The lad, although he could not speak, drank eagerly, and in a few minutes appeared much recovered. Humphrey gave him some more, and bathed his face and temples. The sun had now risen, and it was broad daylight. The lad attempted to speak, but what he did say was in so low a tone, and evidently in a foreign language, that Humphrey could not make him out. He therefore made signs to the lad that he was going away, and would be back soon, and having, as he thought, made the lad comprehend this, Humphrey ran away to the cottage as fast as he could, and as soon as he arrived he called for Edward, who came out, and when Humphrey told him in few words what had happened, Edward went into the cottage again for some milk and some cake, while Humphrey put the pony into the cart. In a few moments they were off again, and soon arrived at the pitfall, where they found the lad still lying where Humphrey had left him. They soaked the cake in the milk, and as soon as it was soft gave him some. After a time he swallowed pretty freely, and was so much recovered as to be able to sit up. They then lifted him into the cart, and drove gently home to their cottage. "What do you think he is, Edward?" said Humphrey. "Some poor beggar lad who has been crossing the forest." "No, not exactly. He appears to me to be one of the zingaros, or gypsies, as they call them. He is very dark, and has black eyes and white teeth, just like those I saw once near Arnwood, when I was out with Jacob. Jacob said that no one knew where they came from, but that they were all over the country, and that they were great thieves, and told fortunes, and played all manner of tricks. Perhaps it may be so. I do not think that he can speak English. I am most thankful to heaven that I chanced this morning to visit the pitfall. Only suppose that I had found the poor boy starved and dead. I should have been very unhappy, and never should have any pleasure in looking at the cows, as they would always have reminded me of such a melancholy accident." "Very true, Humphrey, but you have been saved that misfortune, and ought to be grateful to heaven that such is the case. What shall we do with him now we have him?" "Why, if he chooses to remain with us, he will be very useful in the cow yard," said Humphrey. "Of course," replied Edward, laughing. "As he was taking in the pitfall, he must go into the yard with all the others who were captured in the same way." "Well, Edward, let us get him all right again first, and then we will see what is to be done with him. Perhaps he will refuse to remain with us." As soon as they arrived at the cottage, they lifted the lad out of the cart, and carried him into Jacob's room, and laid him on the bed, for he was too weak to stand. Alice and Edith, who were much surprised at the new visitor and the way in which he had been caught, hastened to get some gruel ready for him. As soon as it was ready, they gave it to the boy, who then fell back on the bed with exhaustion, and was soon in a sound sleep. He slept soundly all that night, and the next morning when he awoke, he appeared much better, although very hungry. This last complaint was easy to remedy, and then the lad got up and walked into the sitting room. "What's your name?" said Humphrey to the lad. Pablo," replied the lad.